welcome to a new incubation talk at Dutch Game Garden. My name is Arjen Loop. Today we're talking about player types with Thomas Mazurel from Gobbledygook Games. Thomas, thanks for being here. Could you quickly introduce yourself?
I'll try. So as you already said, my name is Thomas, and I basically got into D&D when I was a young one of about 13 years old. And we started playing in a place called the Vreemde Zaak, or the Strange Shop, if you will, which really, it earned its name, let's put it that way. It sold everything from Magic the Gathering to Warhammer 40k to any kind of board game and whatnot, and also Dungeons & Dragons. Just so I get a bit of an idea of how many of you actually know what this is. How many of you have actually ever played Dungeons & Dragons? Okay, that's more than expected, fair enough.
We're all nerds here.
Yeah. I figured it was the target demographic, that's right. So, for those that aren't in the know, I'll very briefly mention how it's done. Basically, it's a pen and paper game. So you kind of sit around the table. One guy pretty much invents a fantasy world. I like to use Lord of the Rings as an example. So one person makes the entire world and the rest of them play in it with a character of theirs. So this can be done in theater of mind, or you can actually use for battle, say, a battle grid, like chess, for example, and use different kinds of miniatures for that. When it comes to the characters, it's basically based on your character sheet. That tells you everything, how strong you are, what abilities you have, etc., etc. And the rest is determined by these little bastards. These decide your fate, whether you hit or miss, whether you live or die. So that's the basics of it. Me as a dungeon master or game master, I simply tell the players what happens, and they then tell me in turn how they want to react. And it's kind of a back and forth. So it's not me creating the story, it's me setting up the story for them to make it their own.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's get into the character sheet. We don't have to go into in depth, but we were talking about player types last time around. We discussed personas, like the type of people that are interested in playing your game. Obviously, D&D goes more in depth because you spend a lot of time creating a character. And can you go a little bit into depth about different player types, what kind there are as a basis?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. So last month we went over the young archetypes and such. In D&D it's a bit broader, I would say, a bit more fleshed out over the years because it's been around since the 70s. So a couple have been recognized, and the first of course is the casual player, also sometimes called the audience member, which means that this is a person that is mostly just happy to go along with the ride, be along for the ride, to not partake too much per se, not take the initiative on anything, just take their turn in combat and basically just sit back and watch things happen. And so long as they know that they're part of the whole story as a whole, that they're fine. They're just there to have the experience without necessarily being the one in the spotlight. In fact, if you want to have a bad time with that player, put them on the spot. Try and force them to role-play their character out of the blue. Bad idea. So that would be the first. Secondly, we have the Powerplayer, or the min-maxer, or sometimes also called the munchkin, which is also where the name from the card game comes from. A Powerplayer cares very much about making a character as strong as possible and kicking ass and chewing bubblegum, basically. So they want to be Thor or Kratos or who have you. Be strong, get good magic items, save the maiden, be the hero of the story, basically. So these players are pretty easy to please so long as you just let them do their thing and give them moments where they can truly shine.
I'm guessing that in your average D&D game, these two are serviced always by default, or do you need to take special actions as a DM to make sure that these two are?
Well, first of all, no one player is determined or can be put into any one of these roles. In fact, if you try to pigeonhole people into just one role, they're not going to like it very much. So basically almost everyone exhibits facets of these different archetypes. New players often, like I said, the audience member, the casual gamer. Many first-time players start out that way because they're still kind of learning the basics and they don't really know how everything works or even what role-playing really entails. They just have a character sheet with stats.
Yeah.
So.
All right. And you've got a couple of others. You've written them down for me. Thank you very much.
Yes.
The Buttkicker.
Yes, that's right. Buttkicker, or as I love to call him, the Murderhobo. Now, the Murderhobo, true to his name, the player behind a Buttkicker, he's had a long day. He's had work, he's had other things to deal with. He just wants to sit down, relax, and just take a load off and just roll dice, kill monsters, and get fat loot. That's the essence of the Buttkicker. So a big no-no would be to bore this character with political intrigue or a murder mystery or anything, a puzzle. Oof, bad idea. They mostly could just care about the simple things in life, in D&D life, and that would be to gather as much as you can and leave nothing behind. So again, these guys are pretty easy to please as long as you just let them do what they want to do and don't overcomplicate matters. Next to that, we have the Tactician, or the Strategist. Now, these guys, as opposed to the power gamers, they don't just care about their own character being optimized and perfect in every way as far as they can make them, but for the entire party to be that same way. And we're not just talking, hey, maybe you should do this and that action, but they'll actually start instructing other players how to play. So they're pretty much just an extension of their mastermind, as it were, which can, as you can imagine, get a little annoying for the other players. So that's what you kind of have to keep in mind. They are easy to please so long as you are able to provide them with a proper challenge. So not just a run-of-the-mill monster from the monster manual, but think about tactical advantages, advantage in the area and such, certain abilities that they didn't know that the monsters have, etc., etc. That again goes way deeper down the road, but basically just try and surprise them and have them solve it. That's what they care about most.
All right. Mm-hmm. Who's next?
Next, we have the Specialist. Now, the Specialist can basically mean two different things. One means that they build a character that is pretty much a one-trick pony. They only care about one thing, they do it well, and that's all they really care about doing. And the rest is secondary or tertiary. That's not really where their interest lies, though they kind of zone out when it happens. The other facet of the Specialist is that they have a certain character or an archetype in mind, such as, say, a space pirate. It doesn't matter that you're playing a medieval fantasy game or anything, or they want to play, say, Boba Fett in a caveman setting or something. So setting, genre be damned, they want to play what they want to play, which can be tricky to play, to kind of get around. But as long as you keep an open mind and kind of try to steer them in a direction and make them fit inside your world, you're fine.
All right.
Yeah. And these are the last three. Make room, guys. Come on. This is excellent for Maggie for her diagnosis of me later. This here is the actor. Now, the actor, of course, is a bit of the opposite of the power gamer. Not so much that they don't really care how strong their character is, but more that they see the rules as a bit of an obstacle, really, because they just have a certain character in mind that they want to play, that they want to enact. They've seen something cool in a movie or played a video game or what have you, read something incredible, and they want to base something off of that or come up with their own idea. And anything that kind of goes against that doesn't let them do their thing, they have an epic monologue or kind of square off against the NPCs and non-player characters, that doesn't matter too much to them. So the way you keep these guys hooked is to provide interesting, in-depth NPCs so that they can kind of, verbally fence with them. That's what they care about. And to also incorporate their character background into your story so they feel more involved. That's how you keep these people engaged. Then you have the Storyteller, which is a variant of or a cousin of the actor. And the Storyteller cares more about the party as a whole and the bigger picture. So he or she doesn't so much care about just their own character, but they want everything to resolve in such a dramatically satisfying way as possible. So they don't even care if their own character dies, for example, as long as it's done for a good purpose, or as long as it fits the story, you know. So they're a bit more big picture of things. And having one of these people in the game that doesn't take things personally, doesn't nail themselves to their own character, and I don't even care what the rest of the party plays, that's invaluable. These people you keep engaged just by, you don't have to indulge them always, just make sure that every once in a while the story beats kind of hits what they were thinking it was going to be. That's the most important. And last but unfortunately certainly not least, would be the Roleplay Anarchist, or as they are also lovingly called, the Wangrods. Because these people will basically do whatever the hell they want, whenever they want. They don't care what kind of character they're playing, they don't even care what kind of setting you provide for them or what the story is. They're just going to do whatever they want. So you can basically just imagine a couple of toddlers, running around screaming, poking things, kicking things, and just seeing what happens. That's what they'll do to your entire world. Now, thankfully, these people, surprise, surprise, new players will often also kind of fall in that category. The younger, the more frequent, or more frequently that happens. But these people tend to have the excuse of, my character was just being an asshole. I'm just role-playing my character. Of course, the only real answer to that is, yes, your character is indeed being an asshole, but it's kind of ruining the fun for the rest of the party. And that kind of kills the mood and the vibe of the entire game, because I don't know why you would play D&D if your first objective isn't to have fun, together. So that's why at the table you kind of want to give each other a bit of leeway so everyone has their spot in the limelight, as it were. But this person will always try to hawk that, will always try to make everything come back to them. Be that positive or negative reinforcement, they don't care. Even if they're being chewed out because they're breaking the rules again or they're being annoying, that's more attention for them. That's more time spent on them. So these egomaniacs, either these people grow out of that kind of behavior or you don't play with them anymore. It's really that simple.
So let's talk about fun then. These are a lot of different player types.
Yeah, they are.
What's the most difficult thing about catering to a set of them? I mean, usually a game consists about 5, 6, 7 people max.
Yeah.
So there's not but there are different facets to everybody, every player type. But you have to work with different player types. What's the hardest thing about catering to different player types as a DM?
Right. I think the most important thing to realize first and foremost is that not every party or every gathering of people is going to work. Because we all have different tastes and whatnot, and not everyone's going to like the same thing. So long as you have some common ground between people, so long as they, for example, most of them at least like combat a little bit, or they enjoy the storytelling aspects of it more, you kind of want to try and steer towards that without losing the concept that you had for the campaign that they all agreed to play in. I've had campaigns where there were players from all over the place, and those really didn't work out. They were too different. Some of them were too wild and way too vocal when something wasn't going their way or something was happening that they didn't care about. So they were disrupting each other's fun and even my ability to really run the game. So those quit. We stopped those.
I can imagine, because you said the game that they agreed to play, but with newer players maybe, they might not know what they're getting into. Mm-hmm. And then you have to maybe change your focus a little bit. You can still hold on to the main idea that you had, but you can maybe, for people that like combat, add extra combat, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it might go the wrong way, right?
Yeah, it certainly can. But that can be either player's fault or the DM's, or usually a mixture of both. If you want these people to have fun and to be able to work together as a team, which is why they're a party, you kind of just want to test the waters with different kinds of encounters, different kinds of set pieces, different story beats, and see how they react to it. In my latest campaign, for example, there was a point where I wanted to give them all the freedom that they might want, because they indicated that they wanted exactly that. So I gave them a mission of, okay, you have to approach this enemy and find out a way to approach them and to either infiltrate them or to take them down one at a time. And that was apparently too vague and too broad for them. They didn't really know exactly what they were supposed to do. So then when they were back at camp, I gave them a far more specific example of, okay, like infiltrate this sky fortress and you can use this disguise and these potions to transform yourself, etc., etc. And then they felt too railroaded. So, that's just how you know exactly, okay, so this is too much, this is too little, and then you gradually you find your balance.
Right. And I introduced you as Thomas from Gobbledygook Games. Gobbledygook makes digital games. You're working on Antiventure.
Correct.
Good. Can you talk a little bit about Antiventure? What is it?
Yeah. So Antiventure, the base concept of that is, if you look at many RPGs of this day, but also way further back, like Chrono Trigger, Legend of Zelda, Final Fantasy and such, where you just stroll into a village and you open up every chest and you pickpocket everyone and you steal all the loot and there's nothing left and no one ever raises an eyebrow or says a damn thing about it. What about if you turn that around? What if you are there to help a couple of these poor villagers survive the next plague of encroaching adventurers that's coming there to just absolutely ransack their village, and without using violence? So you're gonna block all of the doors, you're gonna hide all of your stuff, you're gonna try and distract them with food and drink and talking to them, either praising them or cajoling them. So they get frustrated enough that they're no longer all that good at what they were doing, or they start to feel like, hey, these are actually kind of nice people and I've already got a lot of loot here. Maybe I should just leave them be? So that's one way to potentially resolve that kind of a situation.
So to which kind of players does that game cater?
Well, that's the interesting bit. That's something that I'm still discovering more and more as I continue to further fine-tune the game. But when it comes to playtesting specifically, D&D helps me a lot in that regard. I play it digitally because there are several people that live in way different parts of the Netherlands. One of them lives in Canada, so real life is going to be a bit difficult. But we tend to play on a website called roll20.net, and that is also great for playtesting Antiventure. So I've actually made digital blueprints basically of the levels that I want to do, and that way you can also play them with others. Yeah,
so you can test certain levels, but does it also test different player types? Or do you kind of, without pigeonholing them, but can you tell, like, Antiventure caters more to these and these people, player types?
Right. Well, if you want to do game testing properly, you want to do it anonymously. So you want to use, you want to ask open questions and ask the right ones. And if you find the correct questions to ask, then you'll discover more quickly, what do they like about it, what don't they like, and not just, what game mechanics work or what don't, but hey, this was boring and here's why, or hey, this was really interesting and here's why. And based on that kind of feedback, I'm sure you can already kind of gauge, okay, these types of people are more interested in the game or are more prone to playing it than others.
And can you point out 3 or 4 characters or people, or from that row?
Okay. Let's see. Well, obviously the Tactician comes to mind, the strategist, because it is a turn-based strategy game with some RPG elements in it. So there's that. I think it would lend itself to a more casual audience as well, at least at the first bit, so easy to learn, hard to master, if you will. Let's see. There's going to be some story aspects in it, certainly, but it's not going to be story heavy because turn-based strategy players, they tend to either, they have a very short attention span for the story itself, so they tend to, either it's a few lines of dialogue or I'm just skipping the rest of it. So the premise should kind of speak for itself.
I can imagine that the Powerhobo, as it was called?
Murderhobo.
Murderhobo, sorry. The Murderhobo is not interested in Antiventure. Or is there still something for that player type as well?
Well, the interesting thing is the Murderhobo would basically be the enemies in Antiventure, which are the adventurers, which are, the valiant knights that kick in your door and steal your stuff.
Yeah.
So they might get a kick out of that subversion and maybe seeing it as a challenge to kind of overcome their usual role.
Finally, not play a Murderhobo,
exactly.
but a Tactician.
Yeah.
Right.
Of course, the twist long game is that the villagers will kind of turn into a sort of adventurers themselves because they'll get better equipment, they'll level up and such. So,
You've been doing this for a long time. What are the major lessons learned for you and that you can apply now as well in your current venture, Antiventure?
Well, there's a lot that I learned, obviously, but when it comes to Antiventure specifically and just video game design in general, first of all is to be patient and not shy away from criticism, constructive criticism specifically. If someone says, "Oh, that sucked," or "Oh, that was great," that's equally useless to me. Like, I'm glad you had a good time. That's the goal of D&D, of course. But like when it comes to specifically designing something for people like that doesn't tell me too much. I don't even specifically have to ask them, like, "Hey, what did you like and what didn't you like?" Because there is both an explicit and an implicit feedback moment from them. They'll tell me when something doesn't work, and you can kind of tell from their expressions usually whether or not they're having fun as well.
And just to go all the way back to the beginning, sorry about that, but
No, sure.
You mentioned the young archetypes that we used during the game Persona Canvas. We also talked about Bartle, which is an online game, Playertypes. What do you think? Why do you think like the character types that you described for D&D can offer that maybe Young or Bartle can't? They all have their pros and cons maybe, but what do you think specifically for D&D player types would be very useful for someone who creates games for a living?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I thought that the whole setup from Bartle was way outdated and not broad enough. It was kind of pigeonholing people with rather vague questions where I often thought, like, I don't want any of these things, or the option that I want to pick isn't even in there. So this is more open-ended, this is different. And here you never have a person that's just 100% one thing or another. And just keeping these things in mind, just knowing of this and keeping it in the back of your head as you play, that's very important. And when it comes to video game design, you have to understand that you're never going to please everyone. And that's true at a D&D table as much as it is for a video game. So I would honestly say that you could take this and apply it to, for example, certain personas that you make for your game. Give you perhaps a better insight as to what sort of things they like and what they want and not want to do. So I'd say that in that way you can kind of sharpen your target audience in that regard.
At this time I'd like to open up the floor for some questions, so if there are any questions you can step right up, if that's okay with you. Right.
Hi, my name is Daan Kreek, Puzzles and Games. I have a question. So apparently you like D&D. What specifically do you like about it? And can you give me an example maybe? Because I'm not into that world.
Right, okay. Well, there's many things I like about it. Of course, it's a highly escapist hobby, which video games are as well, obviously. But it's highly creative, not just as a player, but more so, of course, as DM, where you try and think of all of these fantastic scenarios that might unfold themselves. And the thing I enjoy the most is I've come up with ways in which this could be awesome. And then my players, at the best of times, they will just take what I thought would happen and just blow it out of the water and just completely, whatever expectations I might have had, they far surpass that. To give you a specific example of what I really enjoyed recently was where I had a moment where a bunch of us worked together. My girlfriend from Canada also came over, she also plays. So all of us were actually there at a friend's house playing together. Now his girlfriend doesn't usually play, so I know she was very much a casual player, more of an audience member. And I thought, well, us all of us sitting there together, that's going to be really boring for her. So how about I just try and get her into it? So I knew she liked elves, so I'm like, hey, I have this elven druid you can play. but do you know what a succubus is? And she's like, a demon that sucks the life out of people? Exactly. So what I ended up doing is suggesting to her that she try and seduce her boyfriend's character and, try to basically murder him. And, well, it got pretty damn close. To the point where the player in question, who I've been playing with since the beginning, really, their characters indeed got into it. So then I told him to roll a Constitution saving throw, and the entire table just went, oh, a couple of them were, they went, oh, succubus, it's just this rabble that just, this rush of energy that just came over the table, and I had her roll the actual damage. Yeah. So it was pretty much a 50-50 at that point, whether or not he would live or die. So that was exciting.
One more question, how long does it take, on average, a session?
It takes me less and less time, both through experience, just knowing more what I'm doing, going through the steps, and secondly because I've kind of changed up my style over the years. It used to be that it would be 5 hours of prep for a session of 5 hours, but these days I try to improv a lot more, or wing it as they call it in D&D, because I want more input from the players. I want them to play a larger role in the world. So. Because I also play digitally, I have any kind of monster I want at my fingertips. It's just there, and I can generate the rolls and whatever I need from them. So that cuts down on prep time as well. It basically just depends on how much detail I want to add to the world. And I don't want to overdo that, because that takes away from the spontaneity and the possibility of the players choosing their own path rather than being railroaded. And secondly, it allows me to focus on what's most important and just have them fill in the gaps and the details later on.
Clear, thank you.
Hi, I'm Ricardo from Bad Eyes. I have a question. You create this world where all those players live in for hours. And in the middle of the game, anything can change. How do you stay consistent to the lore of the world you created?
Right. Well, I may have, as Matthew Mercer might say, I just set the table and they actually cook the dinner. The players provide the rest. So I simply give them the canvas and they fill in the rest there. So when it comes to preparation for these sorts of things, it's half just having the stats and the preparations and the factions in mind, or the big bad, and what he's up to. And the other half of that is simply seeing how the players react and have the world move with that accordingly. So
consistency isn't really that big of a deal in Dungeons & Dragons. It's more about having a fun experience overall.
Yeah, fun should be the constant in the game, really. So you don't want to get bogged down too much in the rules, and you also don't want to just completely freeform and have them, instead of doing your murder mystery, they go into, banking, and they buy up more property each time, and not exactly what we sign up for. It's kind of the social contract where that's not what we expected. It's more along these lines that we're playing.
Yeah, so that is basically a big change between designing a world for Dungeons & Dragons and designing a world for a game. There you have to stay consistent, but here it's more freeform.
Exactly.
But I was wondering, is there always a clear begin and end for the Dungeon Master, or because when you develop a game, then you always have a clear beginning of end, and you have the development. Maybe some players can do it in 100 hours, some players do it in 200 hours, but because of all these changes mid-game in a Dungeons & Dragons, can it just take on forever? And how do you close that? How do you... Yeah.
Right. No, that's a very fair question, and an important one. D&D is much more organic in the sense that you're just 5-6 nerds at a table, playing in Fantasyland. There's of course practical restrictions, as in everyone needs to go to bed at a certain point, everyone has jobs and whatnot, so that's one thing. And secondly, you always try to end on kind of a high note, be that at the end of a combat where there was a spectacular kill or there's a reveal of some sort of cliffhanger, usually. And I try to set it up and space it out in sections where I know, okay, this combat's probably going to take an hour, hour and a half, or what have you. And then we're going to have this section where they're kind of trying to make their way through a wilderness, etc., etc. I have a good guesstimate as to how long that'll take, and I can of course be wrong. But I'd prefer to have more prepared than they actually get to, because that's fine. There's always a next session. It's not like nothing is scripted. Nothing is like, hey, we have to do these 2 combats this session. I've had sessions where there was just role-playing and exploration going on. I've had sessions where there was just one big epic combat going on. And that can take anywhere, well, I usually do anything from 3.5 to 5.5 hours sessions, depending. But there are DMs that run shorter, or 3 or 2.5 hour sessions, or as long as I've heard crazy examples like 8 hours or more. You know, it really depends how much time does everyone have to play. Are you doing a one-shot, so just one contained adventure over, say, a D&D weekend, so a couple days, or are you doing more of a long-term one over several years, where you go up into, you know, the higher levels and whatnot?
Okay, did you have any adventures that didn't get closure? Because I imagine at the end of the session, you all have to go to bed, and the session hasn't ended yet. Then you say to be continued, and you start the next day. But did you have an experience where it hasn't ended, or could it take like years? Like every weekend you come with your friends together and you play in the same world, but the story hasn't ended yet. Can that happen? Did that happen for you?
I have never fully completed any of the campaigns that I've ran. And that can happen for any number of reasons. And that's nobody's fault. It's just that often either the group's too different to begin with, which means that that party doesn't last very long, or people just change, grow apart, get other interests, have more stuff to do in real life, which, you know, sad to say is still more important. So that is a big contributor. Or sometimes you could just kind of lose interest because it doesn't move nearly as quickly as a video game would. And it's unlike a video game, in D&D, you don't know exactly what you're going to get. It's going to be different every time. And it can be both exciting and a bit scary as well. So there's any number of reasons why people might leave or join a campaign throughout. For me, those campaigns ending were also for different reasons. The first one I ran was absolutely chaotic. We had a couple of these guys over here that were absolute roleplay terrorists and just kind of tried to hijack the entire thing, which ruined it for everyone else. So that just kind of made that go bust. The second one I ran was 4th edition, which is more structured, more down to the numbers. And I had a couple of people that were tacticians, all of them. So I pretty much had my work cut out for me, where we played for 2.5 years or something, up to level 20, just really focusing on the different kinds of combat. And eventually, that petered out a bit, because it became, ultimately became a bit too much of the same, and became a bit too much for me to continuously keep on doing that. Because it's hard to tell you how much energy it costs to keep an entire room of people entertained and active and included for up to 5 or 5.5 hours.
Yeah,
so yeah, I know, right?
So you just delete the save data and start a new fresh game.
Sometimes that's the only way to do it, yeah. But overall, I try to end it either at like the end of a combat or on a high note. Yeah, that's usually it.
Okay, thanks.
Right, one more. You talked about being a DM. You talked about making Antiventure. Is there one that you enjoy more than the other?
Ooh, is that kind of like asking which of your children you love more? Or?
Sophie's choice. Yeah.
Ah, okay. I'd say they're two sides of the same coin, because the more I do one, the better I also get at the other. It's still different, of course. In D&D, sometimes it kind of feels like you're herding cats or going, order, order, that sort of thing. And in the game, it's mostly just me and the rest of the team just doing their thing. Do I love one more than the other? No, I love it all, because it just complements one another, especially when it comes to level design and just game design in general. D&D really enhances my capabilities as a game designer.
All right. Well, that's it for today's incubation talk. I'd like to thank you for watching and our expert for his insights. Thomas, thank you very much.
You're welcome.